The live-action remake of Lilo and Stitch thinks that if it keeps just enough of the major plot points the same, that you won't notice how different it is from the original in all the ways that really matter. Like, sure, on the surface, these two movies both have the same story, and the general order of scenes is mostly the same. But the live-action adaptation is constantly making small changes that create serious problems when you look at the bigger picture. So today, we're going to be comparing the two versions scene by scene and exploring why the remake fundamentally misunderstands the original Lilo and Stitch. I'm Dylan, and this is The Writer's Block. The first thing I noticed watching the remake was just how rushed the editing felt.
It's unstoppable.
It honestly seems like they edited the movie the way it was intended to be released, and then someone accidentally removed the first and last frame of every single shot. And I have proof of this later in the movie. Because of the rushed pacing, none of the imagery has time to breathe. Compare this to the opening of the original. We hold on shots for seconds at a time, making the setting and characters feel grandiose. The CGI actually looks pretty decent in live action, but the editing makes it feel like a Mr. Beast video rather than a Disney movie. Even some of the dialogue overlaps awkwardly.
I prefer deranged genius, but thank you for the introduction.
Dr. Jumba Jukiba.
Jumba's line here is meant to be humorous, but the editing feels like it's trying to move on before the audience can realize it's not funny. Another issue with how this scene is structured is the order in which the characters are introduced. In the original, we see Jumba first. We hear accusations about his crimes,
illegal genetic experimentation,
and the tension rises as a vehicle slowly enters into frame. We're led to believe that Jumba's experiment will be horrifying, but have our expectations subverted when we actually see Stitch. It might sound inconsequential, but this initial subversion is incredibly important. It foreshadows that Stitch is not what people expect him to be, and that he's more complex than they give him credit for. But in the remake, Stitch is just there at the beginning of the scene. The lack of buildup makes him feel less significant and doesn't hint at any complexity. And while we're discussing the lack of complexity, let's talk about Jumba. First of all, the casting is just bad. Jumba is meant to be jovial and warm.
Hey, just a little one.
But Zach Galifianakis captures none of this.
If only there was a brilliant genius around to help you catch that monster.
His version of the character is more so an angry dweeb than a mad scientist. Part of this might be because the remake decided to remove Gantu and make Jumba the final villain, but this creates two major issues. The main one is that it goes against the central theme of Ohana found in the original, but I'll discuss that in depth at the end of the video. The other problem is that Gantu and Jumba were meant to portray two different types of dehumanization. Gantu's dehumanization of Stitch is the most simple because it's fully negative. He calls Stitch a monstrosity before seeing any evidence.
What is that monstrosity?
And actively enjoys mistreating him as a prisoner.
Uncomfortable? Good.
Jumba, on the other hand, dehumanizes Stitch in a way that is quote-unquote positive. Jumba views Stitch as his crowning achievement, and he views Stitch's destructive behavior as a good thing because that's what he intended.
I designed this creature to be unstoppable.
But despite how proud of 626 he is, Jumba doesn't view Stitch as a person. He doesn't believe that Stitch is capable of change,
This little girl is wasting her time.
and he doesn't think that Stitch deserves to be loved.
You can never belong.
Having these two types of dehumanization contrast with one another adds a great deal of nuance to the original's narrative. But when the live action decided to combine these two characters, they didn't adjust the narrative to maintain that same nuance. Moving on to Stitch's escape, this is another example of how the rushed editing makes individual moments less impactful. In the original, we watch each and every step as Stitch figures out how to outsmart the security system. When he finally realizes that the guns can be tricked, it's a satisfying moment for the character and the audience. In live action, they rush through his experimentation.
These guns are locked on your genetic signature.
making the realization far less satisfying. It's a small detail, but I think it speaks to a larger issue with modern Disney. Part of what makes animated Disney movies so special is the animation. Yes, the art direction and character designs are brilliant, but it's the way they move that makes them come to life. The way they are animated is a huge part of what sells the emotion of a given scene. Good animation, and even good live-action cinema, is like a ballet. Obviously, story matters, but there's also an innate joy that comes from seeing the movement and the visuals. But Disney's live-action remakes are focused more on information than emotion. They want to tell you what happens as quickly as possible, so they can move on to the next scene, rather than taking time to make you feel actual feelings. They make you remember the emotions you felt watching the original, then try to trick you into thinking that you're feeling those same emotions watching the remake. What really frustrates me, though, is that even with a focus on information, this remake winds up removing a lot of nonverbal exposition. In the original, the escape sequence is much more detailed. Not only is it a great action set piece, but it also tells us a lot about the character. In addition to his raw strength and dexterity, the specific ways in which Stitch evades security shows the audience that he's incredibly clever. When he realizes that the guards are bigger than he is, he hides in the vents so they can't follow. And before he takes a police cruiser,
He took the red one.
he disables the power on the main ship, making it more difficult for them to chase him. The live action cuts out both of these moments, which lends to an issue that persists throughout the runtime. Stitch in the remake does not come across as very intelligent, which robs the character of most of his complexity. The live action version is treated more like a chaotic animal rather than an intelligent life form. This winds up making Stitch feel like a pet that needs to be house-trained, rather than a person who is struggling to overcome his violent nature. We even see this in the way that Stitch is animated. In the original, his eyes are just as expressive as any of the humanoid characters, despite being all black. His body language is so lifelike that you forget he's a different species. But the CGI version of Stitch is made to feel more primitive. His movements are less precise, and his eyes are largely soulless. Now, another issue I have with this remake is that even when it's copying the original's homework pretty directly, it still manages to get things wrong. Take for example the scene where they calculate the ship's trajectory.
Where will he exit? Calculating now.
The main joke here is that they initially think Stitch will land in the ocean and drown,
He won't survive in water. His molecular density is too great.
only to realize that his ship will collide perfectly with the island of Kauai. What makes this so funny in the original is the visuals. At first, the image of Earth seems to be one huge body of water with a bit of land on the very edges. The Pacific Ocean is in the center of the frame, and a water landing feels inevitable. Even as we zoom in, we continue to see nothing but ocean until the very last second. Finally, the landmass of Hawaii becomes visible, subverting the expected outcome in a humorous manner. So, how does the remake mess up this incredibly simple gag? Well, when they first pull up an image of the planet, the camera is centered on Africa, and several other continents are clearly visible. They even have to tell us,
That's a planet full of water.
because the imagery is mainly showing land. Then, when we cut to the close-up of his trajectory, Hawaii is already visible. This might seem like a small detail to get mad about, but it represents a fundamental issue with this movie. Aside from the ending, it's not trying to do something meaningfully different from the original, but it's also not doing a good job of copying what made the original good. The only real draw is to see what these movies look like in live action, and most of the time, the answer is just worse. Like, at least throw in some original songs by my boy Lin in there. Once again, the remake is trying to rush this opening sequence, so instead of getting to see the councilwoman go to Jumba, Jumba is brought to the councilwoman. The problem with that change is that it messes with the power dynamics in this scene. In the original, the councilwoman has to travel to Jumba's prison cell. She is physically coming to him for help, which emphasizes her desperation. Seeing Jumba in prison also raises the stakes for his character, because we feel like catching Stitch is his last chance at freedom.
626 will not come easily.
Both characters are out of options, making their negotiation incredibly compelling. The remake, on the other hand, sees Jumba already in the command bridge for some reason, and he's the one who suggests he be sent to capture 626.
And I can get you out of it.
He doesn't have any leverage in the negotiation, which makes the character uninteresting and unintimidating. This wouldn't be that big of an issue, but remember that the remake wants Jumba to be the big bad of the entire movie. Gantu worked wonderfully as an antagonist because he was physically imposing and his voice commanded fear and respect.
With pleasure.
For that same reason, animated Jumbo works well as a villain for the first 2 acts of the movie. But when your bad guy sounds like this,
Playtime is over.
the screenplay needs to do some heavy lifting to make the audience view him as a threat. Looking at Pleakley, Billy Magnuson actually does a pretty decent job at capturing the character.
Hold everything! Excuse me, sorry, excuse me, pardon me. You can't destroy the planet!
But the remake doesn't understand his function within the narrative. Originally, Pleakley is an expert on planet Earth, but he actively doesn't want to go there with a mad scientist like Jumba. This reluctant and often antagonistic relationship between the two is part of what makes them such a compelling odd couple. But the remake decides that Pleakley is excited to go to Earth with Jumba,
This is a dream vacay. I have so much packing to do.
and the two don't really have a compelling conflict in this version of the narrative. This wouldn't be that much of an issue, but the remake dedicates significantly more runtime to their B-plot. If you're gonna pay more attention to these characters, you have to give them more depth rather than less. Finally, the last line in this sequence represents how the remake de-emphasizes the conflict between nature and nurture. In live action, Jumba says,
What hideous, pathetic planet is caught in your crosshairs?
whereas in the original, he says,
On what planet has my monstrosity been unleashed?
These might sound similar on paper, but the latter emphasizes Jumba's relationship with Stitch. It reminds us that Jumba views him as merely an experiment, and that, like Frankenstein, he believes you have ownership over the life you create. It's a great line of dialogue that says a lot about the character and the narrative, so why change it to something that lacks this depth? They clearly watched the original and said, Jumba needs to say something ominous before we transition to Earth. If you don't have an idea that adds depth to the original, why not copy it word for word? Either A, this movie understands what makes the original so good and changes things just so that it can feel like it exerted its own influence, or B, it's unable to understand what makes a movie good even when copying it beat by beat. Before we jump over to Earth, I just want to talk about the length of this opening sequence in each version. The live-action opening is 6.5 minutes long, whereas the original opening takes up an entire 10 minutes. The difference in length is even more significant when you consider that the overall remake is 23 minutes longer than the animated version. This means that the remake spends 6% of its runtime in outer space compared to 12% in the original. But why does this matter? Well, first of all, we're meant to feel like space is the normal world and that Hawaii is foreign and exotic. A major element of this movie is looking at people through a new perspective, which is part of why we're meant to look at Earth from the perspective of an outsider.
Earth is a protected wildlife reserve.
Spending that extra time with Stitch and the Fleet grounds us in that reality. It makes it easier to empathize with him as a fish out of water when we finally crash down on Earth. By contrast, the remake wants to rush through the opening so we can get to Hawaii as quickly as possible. Now, this might be mainly a budgetary issue, but it still has a major impact on the story. In addition to making the switch to Earth feel less significant, it also makes the aliens feel one-dimensional. We don't have time to flesh out key characters, including the one whose name is in the title, which means that the audience is less invested for the inflated remainder of the runtime. This message is sponsored by Raycon. So I've been using these Raycon Essential Open Earbuds as my daily drivers for about a month now, and I'm very excited to talk about them. It's Raycon's anniversary, and these guys are stealing the spotlight at 30% off, which is crazy considering just how fun and functional they are. I'm the type of guy who wants to have background noise in my life at all times, and with the Essential Open Earbuds, that's easier than ever. Their lightweight design stays comfortable throughout the day, whether I'm listening to audiobooks on a walk or Twilight soundtracks at the gym. And if you're weird like me and fall asleep to 12-hour video game retrospectives, these earbuds are ergonomic enough for me to wear them in bed without even noticing them. I live in a neighborhood with a lot of electric cars driving way too fast, but the open ear design lets me be aware of my surroundings while staying immersed in whatever I'm listening to. And that listening can go completely uninterrupted because you get 8 hours on a single charge, plus a 36-hour case. Raycon delivers the same premium audio quality as the big brands, but at half the price. And when you consider that they have a 30-day happiness guarantee, I feel extremely confident continuing to use these earbuds myself and recommending them to you. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/thewritersblockopen to get 30% off the Essential Open earbuds. Jumping over to Earth, the first big difference between the original movie and the live-action remake is cinematography. The animated movie utilizes watercolor paintings for the backgrounds, which not only makes their version of Hawaii look stunning, but also adds a unique quality that makes it stand out from normal depictions of Earth. It's a heightened reality that plays into the idea of seeing things with a new perspective. By contrast, live-action Hawaii feels lifeless. If you look at movies like The Descendants or Forgetting Sarah Marshall, you can see how other movies have made the location a character. But Lilo and Stitch's depiction of Hawaii feels more like a commercial than a piece of art.
Aulani, a family paradise with just a touch of magic.
Part of this has to do with shot composition. If you look at most of the shots throughout the movie, a high percentage have one or two people taking up the majority of the frame. Much of the runtime is spent in medium shots or closer, which doesn't allow the setting to become a character. If you look at the original, or any animated Disney movie for that matter, the backgrounds are incredibly detailed and visible throughout the majority of the runtime. The backgrounds stay pretty static, while the characters move around the frame, giving the audience a sense of space and giving a location a proper identity. For a great example of this, let's look at my favorite shot in the entire movie. This frame occurs right after Myrtle makes fun of Lilo's doll and gets all the other girls to ditch Lilo. We start with Lilo and Scrump to the left, and the path forward creates a hole in the center of the image. This results in a lopsided composition that helps communicate what Lilo is feeling. She feels sad, strange, and alone. Then, in a moment of anger, she throws Scrump on the ground and walks away, disappearing out of view. This creates a second composition, but something still doesn't feel right. The image is too empty, and the audience feels unresolved tension. Finally, Lilo runs back into the frame and hugs Scrump, because as the movie tells us,
family means nobody gets left behind.
With Lilo hugging Scrump, the image is now at its most symmetrical, conveying a sense of visual resolution that mirrors the emotional resolution of the scene. This one shot lasts for 20 seconds, giving the audience time to soak up every detail. Lilo, Scrump, and the background are all characters in this scene, and their relationship to one another creates an emotional arc. But none of the locations feel like a character in the new movie, and none of the visual storytelling ever approaches the level seen constantly throughout the original. My second issue with this montage is that Lilo doesn't take pictures in the remake. In the original, Lilo's obsession with photography hints at the complex relationship between Hawaii and tourism. These people are from the country that colonized their homeland, but they're also the lifeblood of their current economy. By taking pictures of tourists, Lilo is reclaiming a certain level of control. If they can treat her culture as little more than a photo op, she can do the same to them. Additionally, they help communicate Lilo's unique perspective on life. Most of these tourists would not be considered traditionally attractive, but listen to how Lilo talks about them.
Oh, my camera's full again. Aren't they beautiful?
She is finding beauty and inspiration where most wouldn't be able to, which is a really compelling aspect of the character. The live action removes all of this nuanced commentary in favor of a montage that just makes Lilo seem like a weird kid. We're shown that she's a bit awkward,
I'm in town for the convention.
and that she likes to get into trouble,
You're great! Go, go! Live your lives!
but it fails to convey a key element of her character. See, Lilo is not just weird, she is specifically meant to be morbid.
Leave me alone to die.
The implication in the original movie is that she begins acting this way after losing her parents in a car accident. The death of a parent can be incredibly traumatic, and like with the tourists, leaning into that trauma is how Lilo feels a sense of control.
So I pretend a bug laid eggs in her ears.
But the live-action remake is scared to deal with this topic, and as a result, many of her behaviors no longer make sense. Take for example when Lilo explains to her hula instructor why she was late.
So you're late because you fed a sandwich to a fish?
Yeah, Pudge controls the weather.
In the new movie, this line simply tells the audience that Lilo is quirky in a generic, that's so random type of way. But in the original, there's a lot more depth to this scene. Later in the runtime, Lilo tells Stitch,
It was rainy, and they went for a drive.
implying that her parents lost control of the car in the rain and the resulting crash was fatal. So with that in mind, Lilo feeding a fish a sandwich because it controls the weather isn't just quirky. Lilo wants to keep Pudge in a good mood because she wants to prevent other people from dying like her parents. That's a fascinating side of the character that the remake completely eliminates because, ironically, it's uncomfortable with morbid topics. But okay, even if they wanted to eliminate that aspect of Lilo, there's still a bunch of dialogue in the original that they cut for no reason. Animated Lilo reveals a lot about herself and her relationship with Nani when she's talking about Pudge. We learn that she's kind and considerate.
Every Thursday, I take Pudge the fish a peanut butter sandwich.
We learn that her sister Nani doesn't really understand her.
So I asked my sister what to give him, and she said a tuna sandwich.
And we use the term abomination to thematically link Lilo with Stitch.
If I gave Pudge tuna, I'd be an abomination.
Abomination.
The remake removes all of this, which contributes to a big problem I have with this movie. Live-action Lilo simply isn't a complex character. She feels like an afterthought, a generic child that could be in any movie. I get that this movie wants to focus more on Nani, but Nani's whole arc is based on her relationship with Lilo. And if you don't nail Lilo's characterization, then it is impossible to write a good version of Nani. Aside from just being less complex, live-action Lilo is also straight up a bad kid at times. Take for example the dance recital. Myrtle pushes Lilo first, which is absolutely not okay. But the movie specifically shows Lilo take a moment to think before consciously choosing to shove Myrtle off the stage. And afterwards, she doesn't even apologize to the dance teacher. In the original, Lilo goes after Myrtle after being insulted.
You're crazy.
And it happens so fast that it's clearly reactionary. She's then immediately ashamed of her actions.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I won't do it again.
Which shows the audience that she's actively trying to overcome her behavioral issues. Like Stitch, Lilo is struggling to show people that she is capable of being good.
No, I'll be good. I want to dance. I practice.
She's clearly making an effort, but she's stuck in an unfair situation. Her parents are dead, and none of her peers can understand what she's going through.
Ew, she bit me.
The one person who knows exactly what she's going through is her sister, but her sister isn't around because her parents died too, forcing Nani to financially support the entire household. Obviously, I'm not saying that live-action Lilo is irredeemable, but the writing and performance doesn't emphasize her struggle and remorse. At every turn, they've whittled away elements that define the character, to the point where live-action Lilo just feels like some misbehaved girl, whereas animated Lilo is someone that children and adults can relate to in equal measure. Moving on to the visit from the social worker, the obvious difference between the original and remake is that Cobra Bubbles is not the person who comes to check in on Lilo. Instead, the social worker is a woman named Mrs. Kakoa, played by Tia Carrera, who is the voice of Nani in the original movie. Now, giving the OG actress a prominent role in the live-action adaptation is awesome, but splitting Cobra Bubbles into two different characters means that we lose a few things in the process. First of all, Cobra Bubbles' dual identity makes the character more whimsical and adds to the unique charm of the original movie.
CIA, Roswell, 1973.
It also reinforces that he truly wants what's best for Lilo in all aspects of her life. In the normal world, he wants to make sure that she's given the care she needs, which is why he's so tough on her when it comes to Nani.
I know you're trying, Nani.
Then, when he's dealing with aliens, he wants to make sure that Lilo is protected from intergalactic threats. He saw how far Stitch was willing to go to keep Lilo safe, which is why he shows Lilo how to keep Stitch on Earth.
Lilo, didn't you buy that thing at the shelter?
Having those same character traits split between two characters makes them both half as complex and half as involved in the narrative. I think this is yet another example in this movie of haste making waste. It goes faster through certain parts of the story, but it's also far less efficient, having to write multiple scenes and additional characters just to do half of what the original was capable of. Like, why not just gender swap Cobra Bubbles so that the part can be played by Nani's voice actor without having to change how Cobra functions within the narrative? Also, while we're in this scene, we get another instance of the remake not understanding how to copy a joke from the original. When Lilo lies about how well things are going with Nani,
I'm adjusted. I eat 4 food groups and look both ways before crossing the street.
the main joke is that Lilo and Nani aren't very good at charades.
And take long naps and get disciplined.
But the first joke in this sequence is the reveal that Nani is doing these pantomimes at all. Initially, when Cobra asks if Lilo is happy, Lilo begins to respond, and then we cut over to see that Nani is coaching her. It's the unexpected reveal that makes this moment humorous. But the editing in live action doesn't understand why the joke works, and shows Nani doing the coaching first, then cuts to Lilo's response.
I've been doing very great at hula.
I know it seems like a nitpick, but they were copying things over directly from the original and still managed to mess things up somehow. If you care about the things you're copying, that shouldn't happen. Now, around this time is when we first hear about Nani giving up custody of Lilo,
But my job is to make sure that Lilo is in a stable environment.
and when we establish that she wants to be a marine biologist.
What? Your acceptance letter to your dream school magically taken out of your trash?
Once again, there's a lot to talk about here, but it will be in the final section, all about how this movie doesn't understand Ohana. In terms of visual storytelling, Nani's fight with Lilo is another highlight from the original. As soon as Lilo sees this look, she screams, then runs away. This makes it clear that A, this is not the first time that Nani has gotten mad at Lilo, and B, Lilo knows that she was being kind of a menace. When Lilo gets caught and licks Nani's arm to escape, she's animated just like Stitch, which foreshadows why the two get along so well. Then, Nani changes tactics and listens to where Lilo is running rather than chasing her. This shows how clever Nani is, and foreshadows how she will need to change her tactics in order to connect with her sister. Once again, Nani shows her cleverness setting a trap outside the laundry/pizza box, and Lilo's feral reaction to being caught makes her even more similar to Stitch. The live-action version of this sequence, however, is much more shallow. They keep the bit with Lilo licking Nani's arm, but they cut out the laundry trap and Nani's change in tactics. Additionally, the sequence kicks off with Nani yelling at Lilo
When I kill you!
rather than just giving her a look, which means far less is implied about their relationship dynamic. Looking at the resolution of this scene, again, the remake just cuts down and rushes through key moments. Nani chastises Lilo.
Do you want them to split us up?
Lilo says this.
Stop pretending you're my mom!
And then she storms off to her room.
I know he is my mom!
In the original, much more storytelling happens. When Nani is asking Lilo if she wants the government to take her away, we cut to a close-up of Lilo's eyes. For a split second, she stops struggling and starts to cry. This tells us that Lilo fully understands how serious the situation is, but doesn't have the coping mechanisms to deal with it. Likewise, when she repeatedly screams no at everything Nani is asking her,
No! No!
No! What?
No!
we see that the key issue here is communication. Both of these girls are dealing with far more than they should have to at their age, and neither knows how to express what they're feeling, or how to make things feel okay. This is visually represented by Nani leaning down when Lilo starts mumbling. She is trying her best to understand her sister, but she just can't. Even the seemingly throwaway line,
So why do you sell me? Buy a rabbit instead!
ties back into their core problem. Nani can't be all that present in Lilo's life because she's trying to make enough money to take care of Lilo. But in Lilo's mind, Nani cares more about her job and making money than spending time with her. The thing that annoys me about all that they cut from this sequence is that this is the stuff that makes Lilo and Stitch special, and it's cheap to do. I can understand them cutting out elements and characters that require CGI or big budget set pieces, but why are we cutting dialogue that takes place on an indoor location? dialogue is also a huge problem with the next scene. In both versions, after Nani apologizes for yelling at Lilo, Lilo says,
I like you better as a sister than a mom.
But the follow-up dialogue is completely different and leads to a completely different tone for the scene. In live action, Nani just says,
ouch,
telling the audience that she views this as an insult. What's weird about this reaction is that the remake doesn't think Nani should be a maternal figure in Lilo's life, so having her take this statement as an insult doesn't really make sense. Meanwhile, animated Nani leans in closer and smiles. It's impossible to say for certain, but this leads me to believe that Nani is happy to hear this from Lilo. My guess is that up until now, Nani has been worried that Lilo just straight up doesn't like her anymore. But when Lilo made this comment, Nani realized Lilo still loves her. She just doesn't like the dynamic they've been forced into. Animated Lilo then adds another line of dialogue that is critical for both characters.
And you like me better as a sister than a rabbit, right?
This version of Lilo can see how hard things are for Nani. She knows that on some level, she is the source of Nani's problems, and because of that, she is worried that Nani doesn't like her. This line is the first time she is being vulnerable and confessing these worries to her older sister, which is what allows their relationship to start to heal over the course of the runtime. The live-action version of this scene does show the two sisters reconciling.
You're my sister, and I'll always be here for you.
But it doesn't analyze how their specific dynamic needs to change. It copies the plot without any of the subtext. In that same vein, the remake completely misunderstands the significance of Lilo praying to a shooting star. In the original, Nani pokes her head through the door and hears Lilo say,
I need someone to be my friend. Someone who won't run away.
Because of this, Nani realizes that no matter how hard she tries, she can't be everything that Lilo needs. Between caregiver, sister, and friend, Nani can only be two. And this realization is what prompts her to get Lilo a dog.
Do we have a lobster door? No, we have a dog door. We are getting a dog.
Nani thinks that a pet will give Lilo a friend and show her responsibility. It shows that she's paying attention to Lilo and changing her approach as needed. But in the live-action version, Nani isn't the one who takes Lilo to the animal shelter.
Tutu, can I go into the animal shelter?
Okay, but no wonder.
In fact, she doesn't think Lilo should have a pet in the first place.
What? An animal? What were you thinking?
So not only does this change make Nani less proactive and less kind, it also begs the question, what was the point of her listening to Lilo in that scene? I actually like how they extended this sequence on paper, but this sequence is what confirmed that the live-action adaptation has really bad editing. Remember how I said it feels like they cut frames off the beginning and end of each shot? Well, this is my proof. When Stitch first arrives on Earth, his evil laughter is interrupted by a frog. In live action, they decided to jump cut to a more zoomed in shot to emphasize that the croak is unexpected. But if you look closely, Stitch changes positions between this frame and this frame with no visible movement in between. If this were a character being played by a human, this could be chalked up to a very minor continuity error, but Stitch is a CGI model. There's no reason not to have the positioning match exactly between the two shots, which is why I can only assume that a frame or two of intended imagery was cut off the ends of each image. The other issue with this sequence's editing can be seen during the wedding fiasco. Stitch doing the dirty dancing pose and causing chaos should be an easy bit of visual comedy, but none of the gags are sold well because we never hold on people's faces for more than a second. The cutting between shots is so chaotic that the emotion and humor of the scene never really lands. Even the photography inserts don't last long enough to be appreciated, which is a shame because the photos are actually really amusing. This is also related to cinematography, but the animated movie gives you a clear view of people when they are reacting to Stitch. Which is why the audience feels like he's actually affecting the world around him. But in live action, the camera and editing seem like they're trying to hide most of the background actors. They don't even show the people on the bus discovering Stitch after hitting him. It's almost as if the production was worried about having to pay some of these people as featured background instead of as a regular extra. And it's yet another aesthetic choice that makes the world feel less alive despite depicting real humans in a real location. The biggest offender when it comes to taking longer to do a lot less is the subplot between Pleakley and Jumba.
The Grand Councilwoman was very clear not to draw attention to herself.
In the original, we only ever cut back to them briefly to up the stakes or to deliver poignant bits of dialogue about the nature of Stitch as a life form.
What must it be like to have nothing? Not even memories to visit.
Despite this limited screen time, they managed to be narratively compelling and iconic in equal measure.
Actually, she's just ugly.
In live action, their antics aren't that funny and don't do anything of substance for the plot, despite taking up about twice as much screen time.
Start traveling, please.
The movie wants them to be a humorous odd couple, much like in the original, but this dynamic doesn't work for two main reasons. First, they're both trying to be the goofy ones. If we look at a later scene where they show up to the hotel and pretend to be humans, their performances are remarkably similar.
My legs feel a little wobbly. I know, don't worry. They're fine. You watched the video I sent you, right?
Each one is acting uncoordinated, and the jokes they're making are both centered around not knowing how to talk like real people.
And where are you visiting us from?
Earth.
Even when they're trying to play their characters differently from one another, Galifianakis isn't serious or intimidating as Jumba.
Aloha and mahalo.
So Pleakley is the goofy one, and Jumba is the uncharismatic one. Neither of them functions as a good straight man in their comedy duo. Speaking of which, the second issue is that they don't feel like any sort of couple at all.
He's joking. Ugly, look at me.
I'm not saying their relationship is romantic in the original, but they do feel like an old married couple. They even take on the role of Lilo's aunt and uncle in the animated series. None of that chemistry, platonic, romantic, or otherwise, is present in live action. And you might say, well, isn't this because Jumbo winds up being the final villain? Which is fair, but then change their relationship in this version to reflect that. Maybe instead of an old married couple, they play it like a toxic relationship that Pleakley has to work up the courage to get out of. And while we're on the topic of Pleakley, shame on all the people who contributed to a landscape where Disney wouldn't allow the character to wear a dress.
I tried.
Despite what certain news networks would have you believe, what a person wants to wear or do with their bodies is not the big issue of our time. This scene is also where we first see live-action Snow Cone Guy, so I think it's a good time to talk about how this movie approaches casting. Starting with Snow Cone Guy, this is where we see that the production was looking to achieve authentic Hawaiian casting wherever possible. Theoretically, this is great. Obviously, skin color and ethnic background don't define who we are as people, but sometimes biasing things one way is needed to offset years of systemic bias in the opposite direction. But in the case of Snow Cone Guy, making the character not white is actually less authentic to Hawaii. As mentioned previously, the nuanced relationship between natives and tourists was something that the original Lilo and Stitch wanted to examine. By sanitizing the depiction of Hawaii and focusing less on non-natives, the movie is ignoring a struggle that Hawaii faces constantly. Even now, billionaires are buying up tons of private land on the islands, raising serious concerns about cost of living and gentrification. Is casting one Hawaiian guy in a white character's role the root cause of Hawaii's problems? Obviously not. But does it represent a desire to placate people with surface level diversity instead of dealing with real world issues?
Yeah!
Speaking of which, let's discuss Nani's casting. Sydney Agudong is from Hawaii. She was born there and spent much of her life there. But Sydney Agudong is not ethnically Hawaiian. Her mother is white and her father is Filipino and Polynesian. Agudong does a great job acting in the role, especially considering how weak the writing for this version is, but a fundamental part of Nani's character is that she and her family are native to Hawaii. If diversity was important enough for you to make side characters less white, you can't then go make the lead character in your movie more white. If we take a generous look at this decision, the production is guilty of being thoughtless and insincere when it comes to representation. And if we take an unfavorable look at this, the people responsible for casting are guilty of colorism. The truth may lie somewhere in the middle, but either way, it wasn't a good casting decision. Likewise, I think the casting for Lilo was poorly executed. Like Lilo, Maia Kealoha is a a native Hawaiian. But unfortunately, Kealoha's performance doesn't capture any of Lilo's charm or complexity. At this age, it's hard to say if that's the fault of the actor or director, but the result is a character who struggles to carry the weight of an entire movie. Lilo is meant to feel like an old soul. She's wise beyond her years because she's experienced way more than any kid her age should. And this is an incredibly difficult thing for an actual 6-year-old to capture. Davy Chase, who voiced Lilo in the original movie and TV show, was 12 when she started doing the character. If the movie was willing to age up Lilo by a few years, it would be a lot easier to cast authentically and find someone with the required emotional maturity. Now, some people might think that this would be too significant of a change, but this movie is clearly fine with completely changing the point of this narrative, so an older Lilo really wouldn't be an issue. Also, even though it's not a casting decision, having a white man direct Lilo and Stitch feels weird when authenticity is one of your goals and you're actively removing white people from the movie. Sometimes Disney and Marvel don't actually give their directors creative control, so I'm not saying all these changes are Dean Fleischer-Camp's fault. And the original movie, which feels much more authentic, was also directed by a white man. But this movie didn't have anything notable about its direction, so why not give the opportunity to someone more connected with the culture, or even just a woman, considering how much the script focuses on Nani. Another issue that stems from Nani not being involved in the dog adoption is that Lilo and Stitch's convergence isn't made to feel like destiny. In the original, before even seeing Stitch, Nani says,
"We're looking for something that can defend itself. Something that won't die. Something sturdy."
Even though she's hesitant about adopting Stitch, all these adjectives apply to him. And from Lilo's perspective, hearing this line,
"But it was dead this morning,"
is a sign that he's perfect because of her morbid fascinations.
I like him.
Meanwhile, Lilo picking Stitch in the remake feels more haphazard. They don't make the two characters tie together thematically to the same extent, making their convergence less significant. They also remove the line,
"Does it have to be this dog?"
Yes, he's good. I can tell.
Which reduces Lilo's agency. A big part of Nani's arc in the original is learning to trust and listen to Lilo, and a big part of Lilo's character is being able to see the good in people when others can't. Additionally, this is where I realize that the remake doesn't trust the audience. When the live action wants to show us that Stitch has good hearing, Jumba tells Pleakley to be quiet, prompting Pleakley to ask, "How good is hearing?" Then when Stitch notices them, it feels the need to say,
"Oh, that's really good. Yeah, they're called super ears."
On top of this, we mainly focus on them during this shot, and the answers come so quickly that we don't have time to ponder the question. Compare this to the original. When Jumba first tells Pleakley to be quiet,
"He's listening for us."
there's a prolonged silence, which does two things. First, it introduces tension, making the scene feel like it has real stakes. And second, it causes the audience to start listening closely, just like Stitch. Anytime you can immerse the audience in a scene and make them feel just like a main character does, that's good filmmaking. Then when Pleakley asks about his hearing, the answer is given to us visually.
How good is his hearing?
So we don't need the characters to answer verbally. This is also the case when Stitch gets adopted. In the original, we see Stitch bark in order to bring Lilo outside,
I'm coming!
which prevents Jumba from taking a safe shot.
"I have just determined this situation to be far too hazardous."
But in live action, he just stands in the van with Lilo, so the movie needs Jumba to explain what's happening.
"He's using the mini-human as a shield."
Sure, Jumba has a similar line in the animated version,
Using a little girl for a shield. This is low even for you!
but it's not condescending for a couple of reasons. One, it happens after effective visual storytelling, which means that the explanation is just there for really young kids who might not understand what's happening on screen. The filmmakers clearly trust the intelligence of the average moviegoer. Two, the focus here is not on what's being said, but how Jumba is saying it. His tone and reaction communicates that he's angry that Stitch outsmarted him, he views Stitch like a nemesis or archenemy, and that he doesn't want to follow the rules of engagement set by Pleakley and the Grand Council. Oh, and before we move on, it really bums me out that they cut this bit of dialogue.
I want to buy him. Can I borrow $2?
It's a great example of Lilo wanting to act like an adult, but still being just a silly little kid. Even if the movie was insistent on removing Nani from this scene for some reason, they could have easily had the same thing happen with Tutu/Mrs. Hasagawa. So, because they split the social worker and Cobra into two characters, this introduction only exists in live action.
When things fall out of the sky, you're the public's first line of defense. I'm the last.
And while I don't have a problem with this scene itself, I don't feel like they ever pay off this new direction for Cobra.
I need to find out what kind of threat we're dealing with.
Having a human actively hunting down Stitch is an interesting angle for the story to take, but they end up sidelining Cobra for most of the runtime. The majority of his scenes after this intro are just him standing around next to the social worker while she does the stuff his character was meant to do in the original.
This is our social services director.
Hello.
Hi.
If the movie feels like keeping this character is critical, despite having the female social worker, here's how I would rewrite his subplot. Instead of hanging out with Nani's voice actress, make it so that Cobra ends up running into Jumba and Pleakley. If they wound up disguising themselves as Cobra's backup agents, all three of them would have the same objective, but with very different motivations. This would make all the characters active in their scenes, and add additional tension instead of wasting time. You could also have Cobra be the final bad guy in place of Gantu rather than Jumba, seeing that Jumba is a critical part of their Ohana in later stories. And once more on the topic of Gantu, having a separate subplot for Cobra means that there's no excuse for removing the movie's final villain. Cobra doesn't even help Lilo in the end, so he doesn't really do anything of value throughout the runtime. He might be more liked by the fans than Gantu, but Gantu serves a much more critical function in the narrative if we consider the inclusion of a separate social worker. So, the remake's inclusion of Myrtle feels awkward and obligatory, and I think this scene helps explain why.
Look, I got a new dog. Oh no, not Lilo.
In the original, Myrtle doesn't have a lot of screen time, but she plays the role of bully with a lot of flair.
Ew, get it away from me!
And her visual design makes her immediately memorable. The live-action Myrtle doesn't even have red hair, and most of the bullying comes in the form of ADR.
Lilo. That's the weirdest thing. Just like you.
Like, the camera actively tries not to focus on her, putting her off screen or at the edge of frame, and rushes past any of the times she talks to Lilo. The way animated Myrtle was handled perfectly captures what it feels like to have a bully that turns people against you and makes you feel ostracized. It's an experience that many can relate to. Like for me, I had a kid in 5th grade get everyone to think I was crazy for believing in narwhals, which is a real-life animal that actually exists. Bullying, even if it's not that deep, can have a significant impact on you when you're a child. And the weird way they sideline Myrtle is just another way that the remake sanitizes everything that made the original so meaningful. Oh, and they totally cut out the part where Lilo apologizes to Myrtle.
I'm sorry I bit you. And pulled your hair, and punched you in the face.
Making live-action Lilo feel like she lacks accountability or remorse.
I don't know, blame it all on him!
When it comes to Stitch in this scene, there's one small omission that contributes to how weirdly he is characterized in this version. In both movies, Stitch steals a vehicle from Myrtle and rides off with Lilo, but the reason why is completely different. In the original, Stitch was just looking at Myrtle's bike before realizing that Jumbo was watching him. He then steals the bike to escape and chooses to bring Lilo with him. In live action, he's just a goblin that commits Grand Theft Auto. He was also more than happy to leave Lilo behind. She has to jump in on her own before he takes off in the car. It's little stuff like this that makes this version of Stitch so much less endearing. He's meant to quickly bond with Lilo and then slowly start to learn how to be good and help other people. But the movie really emphasizes that Stitch does not care about Lilo for a significant portion of the runtime. Now, they kind of address this during the confrontation with Jumba.
The only reason you picked her at that animal shelter was for your own protection.
But the movie doesn't do a good job showing the contrast between how things begin and how they end up. In a rom-com like She's All That, the main relationship starts off under false pretenses.
I'm gonna pick the most hopeless girl at this school, and I'm gonna bet that you can't turn her into prom queen.
Then becomes sincere over the course of the narrative.
You never saw me as the girl in glasses and a ponytail.
But at the Act 2 low point, the female lead learns that the origins of their relationship was a lie.
If I could go back now, I never would have made that stupid bet.
So the two grow distant until they reunite in the finale.
I always believed in you.
The line from Jumba is meant to function as a low point of Lilo and Stitch's relationship, but it doesn't work because A, Stitch in live action doesn't have as steady of an arc, so the line between him being real and fake friends with Lilo feels a lot more arbitrary, and B, there's zero consequences for their friendship after this revelation.
Is that true, Stitch?
Sure, Stitch turns himself in, but Lilo is immediately willing to rescue him and follows them onto Jumba's ship. The live-action remake has to be more verbally explicit in how it calls out the betrayal because it does so much less to establish the relationship in the first place. One of the things that the animated montage does so well is show how Lilo is taking the responsibility of pet ownership seriously. She is actively trying to train Stitch, and when he misbehaves, she makes an effort to remove him from those situations. But in the remake, Lilo actively encourages Stitch to get into trouble.
Oh, so you like trouble, huh?
Taking him to places they both shouldn't be, and deliberately setting a bad example. And in terms of real-life morals, yeah, she's just being a kid. But in terms of the narrative, the whole point of their relationship is how they bring out the best in one another, even if Stitch is initially reluctant.
Stuck on you.
This montage calls into question whether or not these characters are actually good for one another, and that's definitely not something you want your audience thinking when it comes to Lilo and Stitch. In the same vein, let's look at how differently they handled the start of Luau Night. Both scenes see Lilo and Stitch having to hang around Nani's place of work until her shift is done, but their behavior is wildly different. Animated Lilo starts off by explaining that
This is your badness level. We have to fix that.
Showing that Lilo recognizes Stitch's bad behavior and wants to make him better. In live action, Lilo doesn't care about Stitch's behavior. Instead, she's more focused on arguing with Nani.
No. Dogs on the table.
Who cares? They're already covered with bird pill.
It's really frustrating because part of what makes original Lilo an endearing character is how much she cares for and pays attention to Nani. She wants to make Nani's life easier, but she accidentally makes things harder in the process. But live action Lilo just comes off like a bratty kid and shows little to no empathy when it comes to Nani's struggle. And yeah, Lilo lets Stitch sit at the table in the original.
Your dog cannot sit at the table.
But that's because she views him like a person.
Stitch is troubled.
Not because she doesn't care about Nani's job. When it comes to Stitch, they also make him more of a bad pet/person by removing certain beats and adding new ones. One that they remove is when Stitch eats both pieces of cake.
Yum.
When Lilo is noticeably disappointed, he spits the pieces back out and gives both of them to Lilo. What some may see as just a visual gag is actually a defining moment for the character. His instincts make him selfish and destructive, but Stitch shows that he's able to overcome those instincts. He's not just capable of empathy, but actively choosing to display it. Meanwhile, live-action Stitch is still an unnuanced agent of chaos. He runs off to find the nearest source of trouble.
We have to stay at the table.
And Lilo technically tries to stop him.
Put it down.
But it seems motivated by not wanting to get sprayed rather than trying to train Stitch. This interpretation is further supported by the fact that after getting sprayed, Lilo gleefully joins in with Stitch for a prank montage where she steals people's personal items and watches Stitch play with fire. The narrative beat this is trying to mimic is when Stitch gets Nani fired in the original, but in the original, Stitch isn't to blame for the chaos. Jumba baits Stitch into a trap, and Stitch only causes a ruckus because he's trying not to get kidnapped. What makes this even worse is how they change Lilo's reaction to Nani getting fired. Live-action Lilo shows no accountability. She even tries to excuse her actions by telling Nani,
You know, he didn't even like that job.
I don't want to hear it.
In the original, Lilo asks Nani,
Did you lose your job because of Stitch and me?
which shows that she cares about Nani and knows how serious the situation is. Nani's response is also quite different. Live-action Nani is visibly upset, which is totally fair, but doesn't say anything positive about their relationship as sisters. In the original, Nani lies and tells Lilo,
The manager's a vampire, and he wanted me to join his legion of the undead.
which tells us a lot about their relationship and how it's progressing. First, Nani doesn't want Lilo to be the one bearing the burden of worry and responsibility. She would rather tell a white lie than make Lilo feel like she did something wrong. Second of all, it shows us that she understands Lilo and is getting better at relating to her. Creating this tall tale about her manager being a vampire engages the part of Lilo's brain that loves all things morbid.
I knew it.
She's taken a situation that would make Lilo sad and turns it into something that makes her excited and sparks her imagination. We can debate philosophically if there's such a thing as a bad kid, but as far as movie logic goes, live-action Lilo is a bad kid and bad sister, whereas animated Lilo is a troubled kid who cares immensely for Nani. Once again, I feel like live action doesn't trust the audience and gets rid of subtlety in favor of literal depictions and explanations. Live action Lilo says directly how much she loves the photo of her parents.
Hey, that's my favorite photo!
Whereas animated Lilo's reaction is emotional and defensive.
You don't touch this! Don't ever touch it!
Live action Lilo directly tells Stitch,
Be good for 1 second.
Whereas animated Lilo says,
You know, you wreck everything you touch. Why not try and make something?
Showing that she understands Stitch on an emotional level. On top of this, the fact that she's trying to redirect Stitch's energy shows that Lilo is to Stitch what Nani is to Lilo. Then, live-action Stitch has to explicitly say,
No family.
Whereas animated Stitch is shown connecting emotionally with the story of the ugly duckling.
That's the ugly duckling.
This reveals that he has no family, and shows that Stitch is capable of empathy. What's weird is that, despite wanting to be more on the nose in their exploration of Stitch's character, the remake winds up cutting out dialogue that poses philosophical questions directly to the audience. In the original version of this scene, Jumba and Pleakley are camping nearby so that they can spy on Stitch, and we get really important lines like,
626 cannot be taught to ignore its destructive programming. But now, he has nothing to destroy.
Like I said before, the core struggle for Stitch as a character is nature versus nurture. Even though he was programmed to be bad, can Stitch learn to be good? Focusing on this internal conflict makes Stitch relatable to the audience because overcoming negative upbringings is a deeply human dilemma. Cutting this dialogue winds up making the movie weaker in several ways. Focusing solely on Stitch's external conflict reinforces that the remake views Stitch as a pet, not a person. Not seeing Jumba question his own beliefs makes the character even more underdeveloped. And replacing Jumba and Pleakley with Cobra in this scene,
Agent Foster, get me the social worker. I'm going undercover.
Just makes all of the B-plots feel like distractions rather than opportunities to enhance the narrative. I truly don't understand why they removed these lines. They're a bit on the nose and difficult to misunderstand, which is the type of dialogue that this movie loves. So why remove that sort of thing the one time it makes your story better and adds depth to one of the main characters? It's obvious by now that I think a lot of the changes they made were bad, but changes like this prove that there isn't even internal consistency. In live action, Cobra doesn't meet Lilo and Nani until the midpoint, so a lot of dialogue from his animated intro winds up happening here. And once again, the movie doesn't know how to make Lilo a complex character, and is actively afraid of morbid subject matter. See, live action and animated Lilo tell Cobra,
You don't look like a social worker.
Which works better in animation because live action Cobra just looks like a normal dude that works out.
You don't look like a social worker.
But the bigger issue is how they try to show that Lilo is clever and inquisitive. Originally, Lilo asks Cobra,
Did you ever kill anyone?
Which is a great line because it reinforces her morbid curiosity, it sets up that there's more to Cobra than meets the eye, and makes Lilo seem smart for guessing correctly about his past. It even turns the power dynamic in her favor because Cobra gets uncomfortable and ignores the question.
We're getting off the subject.
In live action, Lilo simply reads Cobra's tattoos and then claims,
Yeah, I can read. I'm reading you like a book.
No, Lilo, you haven't. The movie just wants to say that you're clever without actually doing the hard work of writing a clever young character. Another issue with this scene is that it doesn't understand its function as a midpoint. Most people think of film narratives being in 3 acts, but good films can subdivide their middle section into 2 separate parts. Act 2A is where the main plot has begun, but the lead character is still pretty passive and is going about solving their problem in the wrong way. Think Rumi trying to defeat the Saja boys, but hiding her patterns and viewing Jinu as a monster.
I hate them, just like I hate all demons, how I hate Kima.
Act 2B is where the stakes are raised, and the lead character is actively addressing the central conflict. Think Rumi working with Jinu to stop Gima,
help us win the Idol Awards,
and learning to accept her demon heritage.
For what it's worth, I don't think you're a mistake.
The midpoint is supposed to be the scene or sequence that raises the stakes and gives the character new direction. In the animated Lilo and Stitch, the midpoint is when Cobra explains that Nani can't keep Lilo if she doesn't have a job.
But I cannot ignore you being jobless.
And that Lilo needs to get control of her dog.
I expect it to be a model citizen.
Before this, Lilo and Nani were passively struggling with their situations, but Cobra has now given them clear goals to actively pursue.
New job, model citizen.
But the remake eliminates Cobra telling Lilo to improve Stitch's behavior, and the movie cuts away to Lilo in the middle of Nani's conversation with the social worker, so the stakes aren't emphasized nearly as hard. The filmmakers seem more interested in Nani than Lilo or Stitch, so you'd think they'd at least put more focus on critical junctures in her storyline. Also, this is the last time I'll mention it, but if you're literally putting the two actors in the same scenes together, why split Cobra into two people? This movie constantly makes bad changes, and then second guesses those changes, and makes even worse decisions as a result. You went from one iconic and narratively important character to two forgettable characters that are inefficiently written. They even add in a scene afterwards where Nani tries to make Lilo understand how serious the situation is.
If I don't find a job by today, then we are going to be separated.
But first of all, Lilo doesn't seem to understand.
Hey, listen. For real.
And secondly, if you're adding this scene, why include the last scene? Just like the characters, they're now dividing and diluting narrative beats. Looking at Nani's job search, there's a couple of changes that really warp the tone of this montage. The first has to do with Nani's relationship to the shop owners. In live action, they all seem pretty neutral when it comes to Nani, so it doesn't feel all that sad or surprising when she doesn't get the job.
Not at this hotel.
Wait, well,
In the original, they make it clear that Nani knows all of these people. She is part of their community, and they want to offer Nani work.
I wish I could, Nani.
You have no idea how badly I need this job.
Making it extra sad when Stitch and Lilo mess things up. Speaking of which, this remake once again makes Lilo and Stitch seem like menaces rather than well-meaning children. Look at how they ruin Nani's job search in live action. At the hotel, Stitch sneezes on the glass, and Lilo laughs while he smears it all over the windows. It's not necessarily encouraging bad behavior, but it's definitely not discouraging Stitch, and neither of them should be messing with the window in the first place. Then, at the coffee shop, Lilo uses wine glasses to teach Stitch restraint, which does show that she's trying to improve his behavior. But Lilo stole those wine glasses, or at least borrowed them without permission. And she's only doing this exercise because she knows that Stitch will want to destroy fragile items.
Really fragile, so you can't break it every time it
It should be obvious that destruction is the likely outcome, so either Lilo doesn't care about Nani's job hunt, or she's just straight up dumb. Either way, that's a total misunderstanding of the character. If you compare this to the animated montage, Lilo and Stitch come across very differently. First, Stitch is no longer defaulting to chaos, which makes sense given where we are in the runtime. In Act 2A, he's naturally destructive and has to make an effort to act civilized. But now in Act 2B, he's naturally kind, and he only reverts to chaos when something triggers his defensive instincts. Because of this change, his character arc feels like it's making steady progress. However, live-action Stitch's arc is both slower and more poorly executed, which makes it feel like he doesn't actually change much throughout the narrative. Second of all, it's much easier to sympathize with Stitch and Lilo in the animated montage. Sure, they consistently mess things up for Nani, but you can see the good things they were going for, and the negative results aren't really predictable. Here, Lilo is trying to teach Stitch about the joys of dancing. How is she supposed to know that Stitch would turn into a Hawaiian Beyblade? Here, she's teaching Stitch how to play music. There's no logical way she could have known it would create a sonic pulse that breaks glass. And here, she successfully puts on a live performance at the beach, but didn't realize that flashing lights from the fans might trigger Stitch's destructive behavior.
Rock it off!
The one objectively bad idea I will call out is encouraging your dog to force himself onto a woman.
I'm sure Elvis had his bad days too.
Stitch really should have gone for a slow burn romance. Moving to the end of the montage, another line they cut from the remake is,
"We've been having a bad day."
And it's one more example of misunderstanding Lilo and Nani's relationship. Lilo and Nani are both struggling. They're in this together. And this line shows that they're a unified front. The story is so tragic because they both know what's at stake. The live-action remake wants to emphasize the weight of Nani's situation, but you can't properly capture that if Lilo isn't equally invested. They can be out of sync in the first half of the movie, but we're past the midpoint now. I think the filmmakers made Lilo less aware of Nani's struggle because they were trying to tell the story from Lilo's perspective, but doing this proves that they don't understand Lilo's perspective. So, in the remake, David is just here at the end of the montage, which tells me they really don't know what to do with his character. In the original, David represents two things. He is the romance that Nani can't pursue because her whole life is dedicated to Lilo.
David, I told you I can't. I got a lot to deal with right now.
And he is a source of chill wisdom that reminds everyone else to take time for themselves.
There's no better cure for a sour face than a couple of boards and some choice waves.
But the live action downplays his relationship with Nani, and he isn't even the one who comes up with the idea of surfing.
Nani!
Okay.
So this version of the character feels kind of pointless. Speaking of which, in the remake, the surfing montage happens because Nani gets a job as a surf instructor, which to me seems icky. In the original, this montage is all about them taking time to have fun as a family, or as some would say, Ohana. It's about Nani taking one moment for herself, one portion of one day where she isn't worried about getting a job or making money. So to commodify that and make surfing her source of income kind of spits in the face of what this scene originally meant. I also can't see why they felt the need to do this. The simple answer would be so that the audience knows Nani has a job at the end of the movie, but the changes they make to the end of the movie mean that Nani doesn't need a job. And even if they hadn't changed the ending, the original movie shows us that David finds Nani a job.
I think I found you a job.
You what?
Old Man Kuakini's store.
Speaking of needless changes, for some reason, the remake starts out with Stitch stuck on the beach, rather than surfing with Lilo, Nani, and David. In the animated version, Stitch is treated like a part of the family. It's never even a question whether or not he'll go surfing with them. But in live action, he's treated like an unsupervised pet. Ironically, this does lead to the best bit of visual storytelling in the whole movie. When Stitch is eating sand on shore by himself, he suddenly notices a dog riding with his owner on a surfboard. The visuals then clearly communicate that this intrigues Stitch and that he wants to emulate what the dog is doing.
What the dog doing?
Unfortunately, despite leaving Stitch on shore, they still cut out the scene where Stitch is trying to build a sandcastle. It's a quick moment in the original, but it really says a lot about where Stitch is at emotionally. He wants to have a family of his own. He sees how much joy these actions are bringing Lilo, and he wants to be a part of that experience. But he still doesn't quite know how to join them. It's not critical to the plot, but when you remove enough moments like this, you're robbing the narrative of its soul. So, first of all, switching from an underwater approach to attacking on jet ski just looks stupid. Secondly, by having them just appear on the ocean already, it eliminates the original line where Jumba says,
"Why will he risk drowning?"
This line may seem unimportant, but it simultaneously shows that Stitch is overcoming his instincts, and that Jumba is starting to question if Stitch can overcome his programming. And third, having Jumba rise up from underneath Stitch like a shark is legitimately scary, at least for a kids movie. If you want Jumba to be the final villain of the movie, moments like this are what actually make the character intimidating. When it comes to Stitch drowning, the original movie makes it clear that despite scaring Lilo, Stitch is not the cause of her being dragged underwater. Jumba is the one pulling them down, and Stitch is clinging to Lilo because Lilo makes Stitch feel safe. But in the remake, Jumba isn't present, so Stitch is legitimately drowning Lilo, which makes Nani kicking him justified rather than tragic. This change also robs David of a great character moment. In the original, he makes the choice to save Stitch after Lilo is safe.
He's unconscious, but I think he's alive.
Proving that he cares about him. In the remake, David only pulls him off and drags him to the surface because Stitch is drowning Lilo. Also, Cobra's presence in this scene makes no sense in live action. In the original, the reason he's there at the end of the scene is to tell Nani that she will be losing custody of Lilo.
I know you're trying, Nani, but you need to think about what's best for Lilo.
But in the remake, he's just there observing the situation.
Send an extraction team now. Someone's after it too.
And considering that he sees Jumba attack Stitch, it's kind of insane that he doesn't actually do anything to help.
The next chance I get, I'm catching him.
This scene only happens in the new version, but the main thing I want to focus on right now is how they screw up David's dialogue. In the remake, David simply says,
I really thought they could make it work.
But in the original, he says,
I really believed they had a chance. Then you came along.
That last bit is critical to the story because it's what makes Stitch feel guilty. David's comment makes Stitch feel like he is the source of all their problems. By removing just a few words, suddenly Stitch's choice to leave doesn't make any sense. Starting with a compliment, the live-action version adds the line,
Mama didn't take us camping. They were fumigating. We had termites.
Which I legitimately love. This line perfectly captures what it feels like to reminisce with your sibling, and is one of the few times the live-action version sells the chemistry between Lilo and Nani. Unfortunately, they also add this line,
I changed my mind. I like you as a mom too.
Which misunderstands both the original relationship dynamic and the relationship dynamic established by the end of this film. So, in the remake, Stitch just kind of runs away without much explanation, which is weird because the original did such a good job setting up why he decides to leave. Animated Stitch's decision happens slowly over the course of that night. First, there's a moment of visual symbolism calling back to the story of the ugly duckling. In this moment, Stitch reaches out to the swan as if he's asking, "Can I be a part of your family?" But when the other ducklings show up and they all run off, it makes Stitch believe that you can't join a pre-existing family. In Stitch's mind, Lilo and Nani are Ohana, but he is not. Later, when Stitch looks at the photo of Lilo and Nani with their parents, Lilo is emotionally vulnerable and reveals what happened to them.
That's us before. It was rainy and they went for a drive.
She then asks,
What happened to yours?
Which is Lilo being genuinely curious. But from Stitch's perspective, it's a sign that you only get one family, and if that doesn't work out, then you're simply out of luck. Then of course there's this line.
I hear you cry at night. Do you dream about them?
And oh my god, Lilo is such a well-written child character. She's empathetic, curious, inquisitive, scared, loving, and so much more. And the remake removes so many of these elements from her personality. I often say that the two kinds of people who forget what it's like to be a kid are parents and writers. And I want to take a moment to formally announce that this statement does not apply to the creative team behind the original Lilo and Stitch. Like, just look at this line.
I know that's why you wreck things and push me.
Lilo has experienced far too much tragedy for someone her age, and because of that, she knows that love isn't fair. People who have lacked love will push you away for trying to love them, and you're not obligated to stay, but if you do, that's a really brave and honorable choice. And on top of this, the people you choose to love might not choose to stay. Just like Lilo points out.
Family means nobody gets left behind. But if you want to leave, you can.
But even if they leave, that doesn't mean you're going to stop loving them.
I remember everyone that leaves.
And finally, when Stitch does leave, he takes the Ugly Duckling book with him, proving that this story, and by extension his time with Lilo, has had an irrevocable impact on him. Even though Stitch doesn't believe that he can belong with Lilo and Nani, seeing Lilo and Nani has taught him that he does want to be loved, and to be part of a family. So in the remake, Lilo is the one who finds Stitch, and she pretty directly explains the themes of the movie.
Ohana means family. Sometimes family isn't perfect.
And despite being on the nose, this moment actually exhibits an understanding of the original messaging, so we gotta give the remake points when possible. Unfortunately, this means that the remake rushes through a lot of the narrative's low point, making the setback feel far less significant, and the reunion feel far less cathartic. First of all, it makes Stitch's return less proactive. When animated Stitch is confronted by Jumba,
you can never belong.
He directly contradicts the idea that Stitch doesn't deserve a family.
Maybe I
which shows just how much Stitch has changed since the beginning of the movie. Additionally, it means we don't get the scene between Lilo and Nani where she reveals that Stitch left.
It's good he's gone. We don't need him.
Seeing Lilo get defensive and close herself off emotionally is incredibly tragic, considering how open she is for most of the movie. Seeing her pretend not to care reveals just how deeply she loves Stitch. Also, it removes Nani's line where she says,
"Sometimes you try your hardest, but things don't work out the way you want them to."
Which is unfortunate because it would actually tie in nicely to how they changed the ending. Once again leading with compliments, the live action's portal choreography when Jumba attacks Stitch is legitimately pretty amusing.
I'm making a note here. Huge success.
On top of that, adding the tension around Lilo's parents' room is a compelling new addition.
That's Mom and Papa's room.
But if the remake wanted this to be emotionally significant, they should have set it up earlier in the movie. Instead of using the picture like in the original, Lilo could have been defensive about Stitch going into her parents' room. Now to the negatives, the remake removes several great character moments from the original. When Lilo calls Cobra,
Aliens are attacking my house.
this is a great way to get his character involved in the finale.
Lilo, who was that?
And sets up a hilarious punchline.
Oh good, my dog found the chainsaw.
Lilo!
When Pleakley grabs Lilo and runs her out of the house before it explodes,
Trust me, this is not gonna end well.
it's a great way to show that he's protective and worthy of being Ohana. But because the remake chose to restructure the finale, most of these characters don't ever get to interact in a meaningful way. Another weird element of the restructured finale is that it changes who gets kidnapped and who does the rescuing. In the remake, Stitch chooses to go with Jumba, and Lilo follows them in secret in order to rescue him. The main problem is that the justification for Stitch going quietly is incredibly weak. Jumba tells Lilo about Stitch's original motivations.
The only reason you picked her was for your own protection.
And then Stitch just decides that leaving Lilo is the best course of action.
If you care about this little girl at all, you'll leave her here.
What's odd is this actually could have set up a really great justification for leaving. If Lilo got mad at Stitch like in the original,
Get out of here, Stitch.
it would make sense if Stitch lost the will to fight Jumba.
Are you white fanging me?
But all the live action Lilo ever says is,
Is that true, Stitch?
which feels like a missed opportunity. Speaking of which, let's look at all the emotionally resonant scenes that the remake decided to remove from this section. First, they cut the scene where Lilo is taken into state custody.
Please, don't do this.
This is what the characters have been trying to avoid for the entire movie, and is a distinct low point for the overall narrative.
No! You're not taking her!
Removing this scene dramatically reduces both the stakes and consequences. The remake also cuts out both emotional confrontations involving Stitch. The first is when Lilo blames Stitch for all their troubles.
You ruined everything.
And the second is when Nani smacks Stitch with a tree branch. Both these moments force Stitch to reckon with the consequences of his bad behavior.
I know you had something to do with this. Now, where's Lilo?
And it's at this point in the story where he has to decide who he is going to be. Is he Jumba's experiment? Or is he Lilo's friend? The Nani confrontation also does something similar for Pleakley and Jumba.
Where's Lilo?
Who? What?
Up until now, their only concern has been completing the mission. But that mission, and the tactics they use to complete it, are the main reason why Lilo has been taken from Nani twice.
Bring her back.
Just like how Jumba learns to stop dehumanizing Stitch, this confrontation forces him and Pleakley to see humans as people rather than primitive aliens.
He's very persuasive.
When it comes to the final action sequence, this is one of the places you really see the remake's budget come into play. Rather than a high-octane plane chase, we basically just get Lilo sneaking onto a plane before shooting Jumba out of an airlock like in Aliens.
Get away from her, you...
And we also get a brief reference to Angel, Ruben, and Leroy, which is neat. My main issue with this change is that we don't get to see Stitch use his chaotic tendencies for good. In the original, the finale is meant to act as a foil to the opening action sequence. Rather than using his strength, dexterity, and cunning for evil, he uses these skills to pursue Gantu and rescue Lilo. But in the remake, he's the one who gets rescued, and the only time he really uses his powers is to lift debris off Lilo so she doesn't drown. I also think that the sequence doesn't give the ensemble very much much to do. In the original, it's Nani who convinces Stitch, Jumba, and Pleakley to help. Jumba then flies them on his ship to get Stitch in range, and Stitch is the one who rescues Lilo.
Abomination.
Stupid thing.
After the ships crash, even David gets to be useful by bringing everyone back to the beach.
Can you give us a ride to shore?
Sure, but I'll have to make 2 trips.
Then, when the Grand Councilwoman arrives, Cobra gets to be helpful by telling Lilo how to keep Stitch.
Aliens are all about rules.
In the remake, David and Nani are the only ones that meaningfully help Lilo and Stitch, and everyone else just kind of stands around while they do CPR. Now, with that in mind, let's talk about how Nani saves Stitch from drowning. First of all, Stitch drowning to melancholy music as he accepts his life is coming to an end is not tonally in line with the rest of this movie. You can't be afraid to talk about dead parents, but then also try to act like this is a serious moment. And speaking of dead parents, even the way the remake handles the picture is sanitized. In the animated version, the photo gets significantly damaged in the fight with Jumba. Just like their family, the photo isn't complete anymore. But even so, Lilo holds on to the picture, and by extension her Ohana, bringing her comfort no matter how bad things may get. But in the remake, the photo is completely undamaged, even after being swallowed by Stitch. I know it's a tiny detail, but if they're too afraid to damage a family photo, I don't think the filmmakers are mature enough to be handling a narrative like Lilo and Stitch. The last thing I want to address about this scene is how poorly they set up Nani coming to the rescue. The only time Nani walking on the ocean floor is ever mentioned is in this scene.
Oh, this is how she trained.
We get one picture, a brief line of dialogue, and that's it. If you want this moment to be impactful, there should have been at least 1 or 2 times where we actually see Nani doing this, and it should have been weaved into the narrative naturally so that the payoff feels surprising rather than forced. This is how I would fix this moment, assuming that I'm not allowed to just cut the scene entirely. The movie tries to draw more attention to Nani being a competitive surfer, so we're gonna make that a bigger portion of the plot. In addition to working a job, Nani could also be training for a big surf competition that would happen later in the movie. Through some dialogue with David or Lilo, we would establish that Nani is hoping to use this prize money to cover the property tax on their house so they don't have to sell it to some billionaire or real estate company from the mainland. Instead of being late because of working long hours, Nani could miss Lilo's hula recital because she's doing underwater training and loses track of time. This way, when you get to this scene, the dialogue could be in present tense, and it would be the second time we establish what Nani is capable of. Then, when Nani can't find a job, it would become even more important that she wins the prize money from the surf competition. Instead of becoming a surf instructor, the Hawaiian roller coaster ride montage would take place during the competition itself. During this time, Lilo, Stitch, and David could either be playing in the water nearby or watching from a distance floating on a surfboard. Jumba's attack would happen right before the final round, forcing her to miss her chance at winning because she has to take her sister to the hospital. Then, at the hospital, she could say something like, "I can't believe this all was for nothing," which could have multiple meanings. Is she just talking about training for the surf competition? Or is she referring to everything she's done for Lilo, only to lose her anyways? Fast forward to the finale, and Nani could use her training to save Stitch in a moment that would be much more satisfying. It would also then prove that regardless of how you interpreted her dialogue, all her effort was not for nothing. But with all that being said, Nani needing to do this at all doesn't make sense. Stitch gets heavier in water, which is why he can't swim, but we see earlier in the movie that David can carry Stitch out of the water just by swimming. Or maybe the implication is that David had to do the same thing as Nani, and we just don't see it. But that's even more ridiculous. Now that we've reached the end of the movie, let's talk about the remake's overall approach to Ohana and theme. The big issue is that the changes in plot disrespect the entire message of the original, and also don't do a good job setting up the new message that the remake is trying to deliver. So what is the message in the original? Well, the animated Lilo and Stitch explicitly states its main theme.
Ohana means family. Family means
nobody gets left behind.
And we see this theme supported constantly by the characters and the plot. Looking at the main sisters, they are constantly making an effort to help one another and be able to stick together. Nani is doing everything she can to make enough money to take care of Lilo, and Lilo's main desire is to have a better relationship with her sister. Even when these two are fighting throughout Act 1 of the movie, it's because they don't understand that they actually have the same goal: to love one another and stick together no matter what. Speaking of when the two fight, we also see how quickly they apologize and come back together. Every sequence in this movie is basically an expansion on the first scene we see between Lilo and Scrump. The characters truly love each other, but something makes them shut down emotionally and push the other person away, only for them to reunite because they refuse to leave behind their Ohana. This then leads us into the secondary theme of the movie. Your Ohana is not just the family you're born into, but also the one you choose. This is the main lesson that Stitch learns. Because Jumba treated him like a science experiment rather than a person, Stitch didn't even know what a family was. But his relationship with Lilo teaches him how great it can be to be part of a family. Throughout the runtime, Stitch slowly starts to let down his defenses and opens up his heart to Lilo, then Nani, then David. This message about found family also applies to the wider ensemble. Jumba and Pleakley start out as reluctant partners, but grow closer to each other as their subplot progresses. Then, after they work with Stitch and Nani to rescue Lilo, they too join the Ohana. This in itself is a powerful message. Sometimes, the people you love will hurt you, but if they're willing to repair the damage they've done, then you can wind up with a family that is stronger than ever. And just to be clear, there are obviously real-life cases where biological family does stuff that is unforgivable. I'm not trying to say you need to forgive your family no matter what. That's a guilt tactic that some people will use to excuse their unforgivable behavior, and I'm not advocating for giving people more chances than they deserve. But if someone does deserve a second chance, forgiveness and rehabilitation can be a blessing for everyone involved. Now, in addition to the characters, the movie's themes are also supported by its narrative structure. If the final message of the screenplay is to grow your Ohana and stick together no matter what, then the status quo in Act 1 should be the opposite. In space, Stitch is basically a chaotic newborn without anyone to take care of him, and he doesn't know how to get along with other people. Additionally, the council wants to send Stitch into exile, meaning he'd never get to have a family of his own. On Earth, Lilo and Nani only have each other, and the government is trying to split them apart. People like David are trying to help them, but Nani isn't emotionally ready to grow their Ohana. Then, in Act 2A, the characters start making progress towards their goal, but without much internal change. Nani gets Lilo a friend so she'll be less alone, but Nani herself is still keeping Lilo at arm's length and doesn't fully accept Stitch as part of their family. Lilo and Stitch start getting to know each other, but Lilo still views Stitch as a pet, and Stitch doesn't yet understand things like kindness and empathy. In Act 2, the characters begin to change internally, but the stakes also get much higher. Nani spends more time with Lilo, even when she's looking for a job, and also becomes more friendly with Stitch. Lilo begins to treat Stitch like a person, and Stitch starts to learn from Lilo about good behavior and actively wants to be part of her family. The Act 2 low point is when the characters are the furthest from their main goals. Since the main goal is sticking together and growing their Ohana, the low point sees Nani being separated from Lilo, and Stitch choosing to run away from home because he doesn't feel like he belongs. Finally, Act 3 is where your characters should apply the lessons learned throughout their arcs in order to overcome the main obstacle. Nani refuses to leave Lilo behind, and in order to rescue her, she has to fully accept Stitch as part of their family. Stitch chooses not to leave the planet behind, and does everything in his power to rescue Lilo because she is part of his family now. Even characters that were antagonistic up until this point prove that they are good at heart by choosing to change when it really matters. When Jumba sees that Stitch's love for Lilo allowed him to overcome his programming, he realizes that Ohana is more powerful than genetic experimentation. When Cobra sees just how far Nani is willing to go to save Lilo, he realizes that she will be happy and healthier here than in government custody. He wasn't lying about wanting what's best for Lilo, he just thought that Nani was overwhelmed by herself. This is why the found family aspect is so important. Their Ohana might not look like everybody else's, but together, they can help raise Lilo and allow Nani to have some work-life balance. By the end of the movie, you realize that every single detail is building up to the central message.
Ohana means family.
Each scene provides evidence for why that message is correct. either by showcasing how Ohana sticking together is a good thing, or how being isolated and without a support system is a bad thing. Now, let's look at how they managed the messaging in the remake. First off, the big change made in live action is that Nani gives up custody of Lilo, and that allows Nani to go to college in San Diego. And if you're like me, you're probably wondering why they decided to make these changes. Well, from what I can tell, it stems from two core beliefs about Nani's arc in the original. Belief number one, that it's not fair for Nani to have to put her life on hold in order to take care of Lilo. And belief number two, that Nani needed character motivations outside of just protecting her sister. When it comes to the first belief, Disney and the filmmakers are correct. The situation Nani finds herself in is both tragic and overwhelming. Nobody, let alone an 18-year-old, should have to bear such a burden. But what Disney doesn't seem to realize is that this is the whole point of the movie. We feel bad for the character because her life isn't fair. That's what creates tension and fuels the narrative. Changing this aspect of Lilo and Stitch is like if they remade Saving Private Ryan, but no one died because young men dying isn't fair. It's another big reason the remake feels so sanitized. It's not willing to let the main characters suffer any lasting consequences. Now, when it comes to the second belief, thinking you need to flesh out Nani feels both misogynistic and elitist. First of all, the original shows us that Nani has goals and passions outside of just caring for Lilo. If you look in her room, Nani has tons of surfing trophies from before her parents died. The implication then is that Nani dropped her surfing career in favor of raising Lilo, because that was the responsible thing to do, not because she was a simple or single-minded character. Secondly, if the remake thinks that focusing on education makes Nani a more fleshed out character, it's also saying that raising a child is not a valid goal for a woman to have. Something that men, and even some women, often misunderstand about female empowerment is that empowerment means having the freedom to choose, not making a specific choice. It's not okay to block women from prioritizing their education or their career, and it's also not okay to force women into the role of caregiver or parent, but it is totally fine for a woman to choose raising a family if that's what they want. Assuming that college is inherently better than raising a family is elitist, and assuming that Nani is not capable of making an informed choice for herself is misogynistic. Nani is a badass, and Cobra Bubbles makes it clear that the government will take Lilo if Nani doesn't want her. She makes an informed decision to raise her sister herself, and changing that choice is actively disrespectful to all that Nani represents. But even though I fundamentally disagree with the new direction, the bigger issue is that the movie itself doesn't effectively support these changes. The message they're going for in the remake of Lilo and Stitch is that siblings should stay siblings and let other people act like their parents. You can add people to your ohana, but you can't change your role within that ohana. But if that's the case, several elements don't make sense. Like I said previously, they kept the line,
"I like you better as a sister than a mom,"
but cut out the second half when she says,
"And you like me better as a sister than a rabbit, right?"
Which theoretically supports the new messaging that you shouldn't change your role within your family. If they got along better as siblings, it makes sense that in the end, they would get to be sisters, and Tutu is the one who does the parenting. But the remake also adds the line,
"I like you as a mom too,"
which doesn't make sense because in the end, Nani is no longer a maternal figure. At best, this new line is pointless, and at worst, it actively argues against the overall message of the remake. Another issue is how they handled David.
I've always loved watching you. Not to say that
well said, David!
In the original, David and Nani's attraction to one another is pretty obvious.
She likes her butt and fancy hair.
At the luau, David is clearly asking Nani on a date.
"You're not doing anything this..."
David, I told you, I can't.
And Nani clearly likes him back.
"She thinks it's fancy?"
She just can't focus on romance because she's busy with Lilo. Then, when Nani thanks David for finding her a job, David's only stipulation is,
"You can just date me and we'll call it even."
The reason this subplot is important is that it shows Nani sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of Lilo. Instead of getting to go on dates and have fun like a normal young woman, Nani has to take care of a small child. It's a perfect example of how being a mother to Lilo negatively affects her. So focusing on this element in the remake would help support her choice to let someone else take care of Lilo. But for some reason, David's whole character is downplayed in the remake. Instead of asking Nani out, he asks if she wants to go surfing.
Well, but like, when are you gonna go surfing?
Maybe when Lilo turns 18.
So the choice is between Lilo and surfing, rather than whether or not she can have a love life. We also never see David ask Nani out at the end of the film.
David? Read the room.
So we don't get to see one of the benefits of not having to take care of Lilo. Once again, it feels like misogyny is motivating some of these changes. The filmmakers seem to think that the desire for romance makes a female character less complex, or maybe less progressive. Now, if Nani's primary motivation was wanting to date someone, that could be kind of problematic. But that wasn't the case in the original, so I don't know why they felt the need to tone down the romance. Finally, for a movie that thinks Nani should be Lilo's sister instead of her mom, there are barely any character moments that lead me to believe that they're good sisters. In the original, the way Nani and Lilo talk to each other makes them feel like sisters on relatively equal footing.
You rotten sister, your butt is crushing me!
They respect each other and enjoy one another's company. But in the remake, we mostly see Lilo being kind of bratty to Nani, and Lilo never seems to actually understand how much Nani is going through. Instead, live-action Lilo feels like she was always Nani's daughter, and Nani always has to talk to Lilo like a child rather than as a friend.
Is this connecting at all?
If you don't show a clear difference between how they act when Nani's a mom versus when she's a sister, then the audience won't feel the importance of Nani reverting to her original position in their family. When it comes to structure, the big issue is that the remake doesn't change its plot points to accurately reflect the new ending. The end of Act 1 is still when Lilo gets Stitch as a pet, but the whole point of Stitch coming into Lilo's life is to be the friend that Nani can't be. If the new ending makes it so that Nani gets to be Lilo's friend/sister instead of her guardian, then Stitch showing up at all isn't actually necessary in the narrative. The midpoint and low point still frame Nani losing custody as the worst thing that could happen to her and Lilo, even though Lilo is allegedly better off going into foster care. Now, it is Tutu that ends up fostering Lilo, so it's not like she ends up in an orphanage. But if the movie wanted to properly set up this ending, here's how it should have changed the thematic structure. At the beginning of the movie, you reveal that their parents always said that if anything happened to them, they want Lilo to stay with family. Nani could know immediately that she's not equipped to handle being Lilo's guardian, but she's going to do everything in her power to honor her parents' wish. Then, each time the social worker says that Nani should give up custody, she can say, no, Lilo needs to be with her family. Instead of making Nani criticize the thing Tutu does for Lilo, you make Nani embarrassed to ask for and accept Tutu's help. You could even subvert the "Can I borrow $2?" scene from the original by having Lilo ask Nani for the money, and then Nani has to ask Tutu for help covering the adoption fee. On top of this, you add one scene where Tutu invites Lilo and Nani over for a family dinner. Then, when we get to the end of the movie, Tutu fostering Lilo would feel much more satisfying. Nani's arc would be about realizing that Ohana doesn't just mean biological family, and the resolution would recontextualize her conflict throughout the movie, rather than making it pointless. Speaking of which, the mid-credit scene negatively recontextualizes the whole ending.
Stop, Nugget.
It's bad enough to completely change Nani's character arc, but if Nani can just take a portal back to Hawaii, why even bother having her go to school in San Diego? Leaving means nothing if you can just take a portal home every single night. And if they don't want Nani to have to leave behind Lilo, why not just have her go to school in Hawaii? She wants to study marine biology. Hawaii seems like a pretty good place to do that. The only reason she goes to school in San Diego is to make the decision to leave a difficult one. But they rob Nani of choice yet again by making her not have to choose. The last aspect of Ohana I want to look at is the idea that nobody gets left behind or forgotten, because in the remake, they definitely do. The first person this happens to is the social worker. In the end credits, we see that Cobra Bubbles is now a part of Tutu's Ohana, which is meant to be a reference to the end credits in the animated movie. But the reason he joins their Ohana in the animated movie is because he's been developing a relationship with them and looking out for Lilo's best interests for the entire runtime. Live-action Cobra spends most of the movie just standing around doing nothing, then gives the ensemble a ride to the beach, then helps attach jumper cables to Stitch. In the remake, it's the social worker who gets to know Nani and is looking out for Lilo, but she's completely overlooked when it comes to being a part of their found family. Which is messed up, because unlike the original, this movie argues that the social worker was right all along, and she's also the original Nani. Why the heck isn't she part of your Ohana? The other big omission is Jumba. I've talked about how making him the final villain hurts Stitch's character arc, but it's also just really sad that this key member of Lilo's family will never get to exist in this universe. The whole point of the original's ending was that when a bunch of unlikely people came together, they formed a non-traditional family unit. And with the help of that family unit, Nani was able to get her life back on track, and Lilo didn't have to feel weird or alone. Aside from the idea of college, which wasn't in the original to begin with, Ohana solves all of the characters' problems by the end of the original movie. But by removing characters from the family, and making Nani give up Lilo, this movie makes the argument that some people need to be left behind.
Lost.
It would be bad enough if the remake of Lilo and Stitch was just a worse version of the original, but based on the specific changes they made, it seems to me that this movie doesn't understand the significance of Ohana. And if you don't understand the significance of Ohana, you do not understand Lilo and Stitch. If you stuck with me to the end of this video, thank you. I love Lilo and Stitch, and a bad remake can't take away how good the original was. But after all this, I hope you can see how little changes can have a noticeable impact on the bigger picture. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.